Okay, good morning. So our speaker today is Dr. Molly Wasco, who is a professor and associate dean in the Collette School of Business. Dr. Wasco started after her undergraduate education, which was in business and Spanish, working in industry for I think 6-7 years or so, and then she got a master's of business administration during that period of time, and then went back to get a PhD and has been an academic ever since. When I first met her here, she was the chair of the Department of Management, Information Systems, and Quantitative Methods in the Collette School of Business, which I think was called Collette at that time. But she's been a real champion here at UAB on using data-driven approaches to being sure that what you're doing really meets the needs of your assumed customers. And this is really one of the fundamental principles of a program that she's been a leader in establishing around the country called ICOR. It was started through the National Science Foundation, but she's brought it to UAB and to the partner network here, and now it's the leader of a multi-CTSA consortium that has ICOR programs around several parts of the country, focusing on translational science. And her main message today is going to be deliberate about how you assure that you're being the most impactful and innovative in the way you approach things. But she'll use a number of different approaches to make that happen. So thanks very much for being here.
So thanks everybody. I appreciate you guys taking the time this morning to be with me. This is intended to be a conversation, so please break in with questions, comments, insights anytime. It's a lot more fun that way than just listening to me lecture. So the agenda for today, pretty simple. First of all, I want to go over why does translational science actually matter. Then we'll talk a little bit about how do you become a translational thinker, and then we'll end with where does your science go from here. All right, so this is a framework we use in organizational behavior quite a bit. This is called the golden circle. And so you can see 3 different layers, starting with what, then how, and why. And when you look at why organizations are successful, why some organizations are consistently able to outcompete others, is because they're able to explain the why. So when you think about, what the circles mean, most organizations and people within organizations are very good at explaining what it is they do. So what do we do here? What do we do at UAB? This is not a trick question. We're an academic medical center, right? So what do? We're an institution of higher education. We teach, we do research, we do service. How do we do that? Well, we apply to NIH, NSF, other grant funding agencies so we can support the people in our lab. Why do we do that? So we can make more money. Why don't you come to UAB? Well, that's not very compelling, is it? So it comes down to what is your purpose? What is your why? Why do you do what you do? Why do you get up at 8 o'clock in the morning to come to work every single day? What is it that is actually driving you? So let's try that again. So here we are at UAB. What do? Academic medical center. We do teaching, we do research and service. How do we do it? We have these really cool labs that we do a lot of incredible science with. Why do we do it? Why do you get up every morning? Because I've invested so much in my career path. No, why do we do it? Because we want to impact the quality of life for the people in our communities. Want to join us? If you have a good, compelling why, and you can connect to people based on their values, their beliefs, what they want to achieve, then they're much more likely to come along with you and buy into your vision. So why do we do what we do? And that's how I've structured today's talk. So first of all, what is translational science? You're sitting in this class. What are you, about 7 weeks in?
More.
8 weeks in? 10 weeks in? All right, so this is an easy one. Softball question. What is translational science? Is there more coffee and sugar?
Wait them out. They will start to talk.
I can call on people. MBAs love it when I do that.
It's moving science from bench to bedside or to the community.
Very good. So it's this idea that how do we accelerate the transfer of knowledge across boundaries? And so, you know, David did a very nice introduction for me. So I came out of production operations management. I went into IT. Are you asking the question, what in the world is she doing here? Right? So my area of expertise, my research focuses on how does knowledge transfer across boundaries. So if you look at sources of innovation, innovation comes from ideas crossing boundaries. And the bigger the boundary, the greater the innovation. And so when I heard about the Center for Translational Science, I thought, what a great context in which to do research. So here we are, we've got basic scientific discovery. How do we get science from this T0, T1 phase to transfer across this boundary into T2, and then into T3, then into T4, and really impact human health? So, and the purpose is to accelerate this process. So we talk about knowledge in a couple of ways. One, knowledge is very, very sticky. Ideas that are created in one context, in one lab, are very, very sticky. They stay right there. Knowledge, we want it to be leaky. We want it to be able to transfer across this boundary. It's very, very difficult to do. All right, so how do we do it? What do we do in the CCTS? How do we support translational science?
Bring those people together.
So we're bringing people together in this context.
Offer resources.
Offer resources. Very good. So if you look at the different types of resources the CCTS provides, let's see, we have grant help, we have a grant library, very cool. We provide funding opportunities, pilot funding. We actually have these project panels where if you have an idea, you can come and get it vetted by experts. We do biostats and study design. So if you have questions about how to actually get rigorous, reproducible results, we have resources for that. Clinical services. So if you want to do early stage clinical trials, we can support those. We have different core facilities that have a lot of really cool equipment in them. We can do research data requests. We have an amazing informatics group. We can give you mini sabbaticals. We can do research vouchers, drug discovery. That's how we do it. All right. My question is, why do we do it? So if you look at academic medical centers, we're over here. We are super good at discovery. So the CCTS will make sure that you do the best science possible. However, I come from a very different world. I come from, so what? What is the real impact of our research on our communities? How do we go across this final boundary between our research labs and real impact in the community? And so this is the translational boundary I'm focused on. And when I came to the CCTS, did you see any resources on the last page for that? So I was struck by, here we are accelerating science, but what we're really doing is focusing on better science. And so my role with the CCTS is how can we also have greater impact? So my worldview, science is the means to an end. Science is not the end in itself. So funding for your science is a means. Getting your science done is a means. Getting more money to run your lab, that is a means. What is your end? What is your why? What is your impact? And so hopefully by the end of today, that you guys will go out of here with a different kind of mindset. One that questions, when you're writing your K, your R, whatever scientific branch you're gonna put through, or paper, that you have in mind while you're writing why you're doing what you're doing. Who is the real person at the end that you're going to impact? So our funding agencies have realized that this is a tremendous gap. So this is a graph of funding from NSF. It was produced by NSF, but it's very similar to NIH. And you can see when it comes to basic discovery science, Some type of grant agency funds the majority of that. However, to get it from basic science out into commercial development and actual commercialization, that you see this tremendous fall off. And so NSF and NIH have put in place 2 different programs. One program is called I-Corps. This is really about discovering what is the actual need for your science. And then the next one is the SBIR program. So actually creating a small business and then focusing on research and development to develop it farther, hopefully to the point where some other commercial entity will pick it up, either through venture capital and continue to build your startup, or some other organization will come in and license it from you. So here is the NSF I-Corps network. We call it the National Innovation Network. And the focus here is how do we increase the economic impact of the science that we're doing. So NSF has actually, it's closer to $8 billion now that they fund in research, and they want to be able to articulate, why does that matter? Why does if we want Congress to continue to fund us, we need to tell the congressmen and women why it matters, the impact we've had in their community. So you can see there are about 87 different sites. These are individual institutions that have I-Corps programs at their site. We also have a program for nodes. These are kind of super sites where they support the sites in their region, and then they also offer programs for institutions that don't have sites themselves. Here's NIH. So NIH actually has access to the National Innovation Network. The way it works, though, is you already have to be a funded SBIR. You already have to have a small business before you go discover if you have any customers. We think that's the wrong order. We think you need to discover first if there's a market demand and then go after your SBIR. But the potential funding here, $30 billion. If I was an organization spending $30 billion, wouldn't I want to know the return on that investment? And so here's how the program works. I-Corps, if you come through a site or a regional program and you have a promising idea, we can send you to something called the national program. The national program gives you a $50,000 stipend, a grant basically, to go engage in this idea of finding your customers. So at the end of this 7 weeks, you have a very good idea how your science would move forward actually into the community. Then the goal is to get you to apply for an SBIR. So they're phase 1, phase 2, but you can see pretty substantial funding. And if you have a good idea, that $1 million often will go up to $2 to $2.5 million. The focus of the I-Corps program is, do you have a market? Do you have customers? If you are insanely successful with your science, will people pick it up? Will it impact our communities? The goal of the SBI program is to really make sure that you've vetted the science. So it's more for R&D. David.
Some people may not know what SBIR stands for.
Small Business Innovation Research Awards. So, and then it's a sister program, STTR, forget what that one is. The only different, it's a slightly different grant mechanism. So you know how you guys have different Ks? So similar thing. And if you're interested, on June 24th, Lily Portilla, who actually runs the SBIR program for NCATS, the funding organization for the CTSAs, she will be here on campus giving a talk. So if you're interested and you want to follow on, learn more about it, she will actually be here, and she's holding office hours with individuals as well. So she'll give a talk in the morning, we'll have a panel, so you'll be able to, we'll send you that information. All right, so my focus, innovation to impact. So I've trained a lot of scientific teams. And what we used to think about, the process for startups was all it took was a really good team, some super smart people, a great idea, you toss a ton of money at them, you let some time go by, and then voila, you have a company. The reality of that model is that it doesn't work. 90% of startups fail. When you have to try to pick winners and fund them, it is a very risky proposition. The actual pathway looks a little bit more like the red line. So I want to give you an example of a team that we worked with out of Auburn. So this is Alan David. He's an assistant professor at Auburn. He is actually a chemical engineer, so really interesting guy. He applied to go into the I-Corps program, and the way he described what he was doing, it was self-assembling nanosystems to create nanoparticles for theranostics. So I'm reading this, and I'm going, I don't know what that is, but that sounds like a really cool idea. So the first thing that we have teams do when they come into the program is answer 3 very simple questions. First one, who is my customer? Second, what is my product or service? And then third, why do my customers care? So their first stab at this was pretty interesting. They said that MRI centers would want contrast agents. That's what a self-assembling nanosystem is for theranostics. A contrast agent that is better. Like, okay, that's a pretty good version 1.0. MRI centers are not customers, they're buildings. So who in that actual building cares about what you're doing? So their version 2 was radiologists. We think radiologists want contrast agents or will buy contrast agents. And then remember what they said, because they're better? What does better mean? They said higher quality results. Radiologists want contrast agents that produce higher quality results. We then take them through, all right, so you have what you think is product market fit. Not all ideas that all problems worth solving actually will become a business. So for that, you need to develop something called a business model, and we use a tool called the Business Model Canvas. So now that you know your customer and your value proposition, how would you get your product to them? What kind of relationship do you need to have with your customer? What kind of revenues would that generate? What key activities will your organization have to do? What resources do you need? What kind of partners do you need to do this? And what is this going to cost you? So as part of the course, we actually have people work through their ideas on a business model canvas. But you know what? As long as we're sitting together in a classroom or in a workshop and we fill this out, we have a bunch of guesses, right? Essentially, they're hypotheses. Well, you know how to test hypothesis, don't you? You have to go collect data. So it's really the scientific method applied to startups. All right, so how do you test the hypothesis radiologists care about contrast agents to get better results or to get higher quality results? Survey. So survey is a method. However, surveys don't necessarily always return the data. Often it's skewed based on your confirmation bias of what you want to learn. How else can you do it?
Talk to radiologists.
Oh my God, talk to radiologists. So, oops. That's where the big light bulb went off for me. This idea that people in labs do not want to talk to people. So that is what they look like. So their homework was to go talk to 30 radiologists. That's what the funding is for. And ask them questions. What keeps you up at night? What do you like about contrast agents you're using now? What do you wish they could do better? So not going out and selling, hey, you know, I have a contrast agent that gives you better results, want to buy it. But what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about? Last time you bought contrast agents or switched, how did you do that? So you're discovering from radiologists what's important to them. So first of all, convincing scientists to actually go talk to real people, that's an awesome skill set. It is an awesome skill set, one that we do not develop very well as we develop our scientists. So that was one thing. Second, guess what they discovered when they talked to 30 radiologists? So this was a team of the professor and 2 PhD students doing their dissertation in this area. What do you think they heard? We don't give a crap about higher quality results, that the results are good enough. What kept radiologists up at night was the contrast agents are poisoning patients, and they're so toxic that many patients can't even use them. So they came back in looking like this. And they're like, we're studying the wrong thing. We're solving the wrong problem. Luckily, they were able to pivot their thinking. Why can't we do higher quality results and safer for patients? And so it was a huge aha moment for these folks that, you know, can you validate your assumption about how your research will have impact while you're thinking about doing your research? And so one of the things, I don't expect our academic scientists to go all and be entrepreneurs. That's really not my end goal. That would be great if it happens. But for me, I love seeing this shift in thinking that our academic scientists get as part of this program. The new skills they develop, being able to go out and talk to real people, being very comfortable doing that. And so this is the real aha insight. So the CCTS, all of those different activities that we have, the resources we provide, it's really about, are we doing science right? I-Core, this idea of impact and translating across that boundary, is a different question. Is, are we doing the right science? And I think we can do both. So when you think about how you guys are developing as scientists, how we trained you, that typically you know what your T is. So we call it, what's your T, right? So you get focused in one area. And then we put you with mentors in labs that help you develop that scientific expertise. You become very good in your research area, very deep thinkers. Then, so we keep you there, and then you become very, very deep thinkers. But the challenge with that is it creates silos. The deeper you get into your science, the harder it is to actually talk to the people around you. That you start thinking like those scientists. You start thinking, hi, I'm a T1 scientist. I work in this area. So your personal identity starts with, what is your science? So you're sitting and talking to people about your science. You sound really, really smart. You have developed your own language, your own code. Your abstracts sound really awesome to about the 200 other people that actually can understand it. So here's a joke. You know, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer walk into a bar. They have nothing in common. So this is an example. You develop your specialized language, but then when you actually try and go and talk to other people, you don't understand what they're saying, and you don't have a context to really transfer ideas. That's where these silos come from. So here are the best predictors of knowledge transfer. So this is the research I do. This is based on scientific research, similar to what you guys do. Number one, who do you know? So typically you will access expertise from a person. So it depends on, who do you know in your network? Do you have a network of people similar to you, so you become deeper in your science, but do you also know people around you? So if you're a T1 scientist, do you know any T2 scientists or T4 scientists? So this idea, who do you know? The second thing is knowing who knows what. So if you know someone, you know what their expertise is, so you can go to that person if you have questions. Third one, shared language. So you don't have to be an expert in the other area, but you at least need to have some of the basic vocabulary to be able to talk to them. So I talked about the business model canvas, having a business model, a value proposition. Those are all new words that you're going to have to learn in order to be able to translate your ideas to a business person and vice versa. Shared language. You have to make yourself available. So people go to other people who actually are available, not sitting in their lab, not saying I'm too busy, people that show up to things like this. Just showing up demonstrates availability. And then finally, you have to show interest and curiosity in what the person is actually saying. So these are the best predictors. In our scientific language, we call who you know basically structural social capital. It is who is in your network. Knowing who knows what and having a shared language, we call that cognitive social capital. Can you actually transfer ideas? And then availability, interest, curiosity, we call that relational capital. These are the 3 top predictors of new knowledge creation. So when I think about what that means, it means people need to become what we call these T-shaped scientists. So, you know, the vertical of the T, very deep scientists, very, experts in their own knowledge areas, but then also having this ability to share language and cross boundaries. So can you talk to somebody in informatics and understand what they're saying? Can you talk to somebody in biostats? Can you talk to somebody across a T? So translational scientists, translational thinking, from my point of view, is really about, are we developing these T-shaped scientists? So what actually is a T-shaped scientist? I don't know. However, I do know a guy that seems to be exceptional at doing this. And so, you know, when I'm in my experience with working with scientists, it's hard to define until you get an actual case. So this is Lucio Miele. How many of you guys have met Lucio? David and Beck. Okay, so the reason I picked him, so we do partner network meetups. So I've been with Lucio several times. And of course, most of these folks are academic scientists, really good deep thinkers. So I'm talking to Lucio and another very senior, very well-renowned scientist. And so the scientist is talking to us about his cancer research and some of the new discoveries. I don't understand a single word. You know, actually they weren't even English, things like beta. And so it was so interesting. Lucio is standing right next to this person and translate it into English that I could understand. So this is an area of the cell, and we're trying to, you know, attack it by finding things that attract each other. And even when that other scientist was standing there and watching this, couldn't change his language. He just kept talking in academic abstract language. And Lucio would translate that so I could understand. It was fascinating to me. So when I think about, all right, so what is the skill set? What makes Lucio really stand out? First of all, translational thinkers. They're human-centered. They think about the people and the problems. So problems are just out there in the world. They're not out there in, you know, PubMed abstracts. Problems are things that are felt by real-world people. So keeping in mind, always having empathy for the people that you try to help. Can you actually walk in the shoes? If you are in cancer research, have you actually spent face-to-face time understanding what it's like to be that kind of patient? So this idea, human-centered, focus on people. Second, radical collaboration. This is something we do not teach very well. We have a tendency to say, I want you to stay in your lab, I want you to work on my research, and anything else you do is actually wasted time. So I've worked with a lot of trainees, and I teach a lot of really interesting classes from my point of view. Things like research project management. How do you actually, you know, in business, we know how to manage projects. There's a process, there's a template, you just follow these. However, I hear a lot, well, I can't take your class because I'm not allowed out of my lab. We've got to change this. Science, really difficult problems in science cannot be solved within a single lab. We need to be open to this idea of radical collaboration. Can you actually bring together different people from different backgrounds and get them sharing ideas? So the insights, the real innovation, comes from the diversity of ideas coming together. You need to be multilingual. So this is the idea of, can you take the perspective of another, deeply rooted in your own science, or perspective making, that is going vertical, but then perspective taking, actually appreciating the perspective of another person. And then looking outside of your box. So this idea, are you learning things from other disciplines so you can transfer ideas? Insatiably curious. Can you begin with a beginner's mindset?
Sorry. My question is about the previous slide.
Okay.
You know, so I wrestle with this quite a bit because we had a wonderful talk last week about writing scientific abstracts of all things. And one of the takeaways was that we want to make sure that we're not overstating our science, right? So I'm a very basic scientist, so the problems that I work on are, you know, very, very small in terms of the impact that they're making at the time. But they have the potential to solve much bigger problems, right? And so we always want to start with those like heavy hitters, you know, like this pathway that I'm exploring has the ability to change the face of cancer treatment, blah, 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 right? So, you know, one of the things that I take away from what you're saying is that when we talk to someone, we want to focus maybe more on those kind of big picture, you know, what'd you call it, real English or whatever, statements. And so how do we as basic scientists find this very careful balance between wanting people to understand why what we're researching is important, but not overstating the impact that our research is likely to have?
So that is such a good question. So perspective taking is really about, and human-centered, empathy, understanding the person that you're speaking to. If you guys want to get a grant funded, who's the audience for that?
The like panel that sits.
Other smart people just like you that understand that scientific language. What if you're talking to your mom? So it's just this idea of developing a skill set of knowing who am I talking to and how can I connect with them using words that they will be able to understand and support me. It is a great question. So, and translational thinkers are able to do both. They're able to speak their scientific language, but they're also able to express the impact of what they're doing to real people. It's a really good question. So once again, this idea, translational thinkers, that it's kind of like glasses or a lens that you put on to look at your science. When it's a scientific review panel or other academics like you use the lens of science. However, if it's a business person, you take those glasses off and put on a new set. Here's the impact and maybe the commercial potential of it. When you're talking to potential donors or your parents or people around the table at Easter, then you need to use other types of language. So metaphors. You guys are very familiar with metaphors. So instead of talking about the cells and the interaction with the cell, can you talk about it like a beehive or a school bus or using language, everyday language that people can understand and grasp? Great question. So translational thinkers are able to translate their language across these different boundaries based on empathy with the person they're talking to.
Can I add one
Please do.
dimension of this? So, but I think one of the things you're concerned about is being ruthlessly honest about where you are
Yeah.
and what you're doing.
Your grandmother doesn't care about that.
So I think that's, yeah, I think that's an important message. So I think there's nothing dishonest about focusing on where you're going. I mean, I think people understand when you say we're dozens of steps away from being ready to have a direct impact on this, but here's why we're doing it. And that's totally honest, and I think helps you focus on why you're doing it, and to figure out whether all these steps that you foresee between now and when you'll know enough to be going forward, are all of them necessary, or are some of them ones you could put aside because they don't really matter. I don't know, I think that you do want to avoid being dishonest. I actually struggle with this a lot because I was a Howard Hughes investigator for a long time, and one of my perceptions was that Howard Hughes investigators knew how to present what they were doing really well. And I felt like sometimes that was throwing a lot of smoke around what was really going on to get the final message out that you wanted to get out, and not necessarily having everything you needed to back it up. But, you know, I think there's an in-between where you can learn how to present what you're doing in a way that brings the person you're talking to where you want to be without being dishonest. And there's a real skill set to that. And I think that's some of the things that Molly is trying to encourage us to get good at. And you, I mean, there were times when I felt, you know, I've been a little close to not having all that I needed to make this story be truly pulled together. But I knew more about it than the people I was talking to, and they need to, ultimately they have to trust you to be telling them something that's reliable and useful. So you want to take your honesty quiz with yourself to be sure that, you know, what's the chances that you're missing some important question that if it's asked, you're going to realize that you've been way over where you should be. And you just have to think all those things through, but not be paralyzed by the potential to not have every detail. Yeah, then people will understand if you say there's missing pieces here, but this is why we're doing it.
So, you know, once again, this idea of empathy with your audience. So you remember I put up, here are the variables that are predictors of knowledge transfer? And I told you this is what our research has found. So how many of you guys immediately went to what's the p-value? What were the measures? What type of statistical technique did you use? What was your sample? Did you have, you know, a control? So, you know, that stuff is not relevant to you guys. You need to trust that what I'm presenting is, you know, the outcomes of our research. If I was at an academic conference, you bet they're going to want to see the correlation table and all the rest of the measures, because they want to make sure that I have valid science and the boundary conditions around that. Very good point. So this ability to speak in different languages, depending on empathy with the audience and what is going to add value to your audience. What's the message they want to hear from you? But I agree. So part of our training as scientists is this idea of we don't like to state conclusively that we have found or discovered or done something. It's all clouded with the likelihood, and the correlation doesn't mean causation. But if you're trying to talk to people, different types of people, think about it from their point of view. They don't even know what a p-value is.
But
And
the thing is, it's even stronger than don't like to. We're told not to. We're told not to. You know what I'm saying?
So I'm giving you permission when you're talking, you know, at dinner, at a dinner party with your friends, that you can actually talk about the cool stuff that you're doing without qualifying everything. So think about, you know, why you're doing it. That's what they're going to care about.
But if you're trying to get somebody to invest $5 million in what you're doing, then it's a little bit different.
So,
But you have to engage them so they see why they want to do it. But you also need to give them enough information that they can assess what their likely return on investment is going to be.
You bet. But that is a different kind of scientific evidence. So what an investor wants to look at is, what's the problem? Who's the customer? Will I get paid? And they're going to believe that you can do the science. Or they're going to bring in another expert to vet the science and where it is, and then you'll get a timeline of essentially what are the different steps. You'll have milestones to get your science out to market. But once again, if you're talking to a business person, they're going to want to know what's the value proposition, what's the return on investment, a very different kind of language.
But really, I think the key message is that the study section is an investor too. And so this isn't just if you're trying to bring a product to market. This is if you're trying to develop your science, right? So,
and empathy with that audience. What does the study section? It's a very different kind of information. So this idea of multilingual, knowing your audience, empathy with the person. So, but once again, I can promise you that if you submit a grant where you have said you've gone out and actually talked to 50 people to validate your specific aim, and you know what your impact is going to be, it's going to be a stronger grant. You're going to be a better scientist if you have evidence of the real impact. T1, maybe you talk about where it's going to go for T2. So have you talked to 30 T2 scientists that might be able to pick up your idea, translate it across the boundary? So what is the next step? All right, insatiably curious. You have to be willing to listen to the other person's point of view. And you have to be willing to ask why. So if you're telling me about your science and I don't understand, I'm going to keep asking you why. And one of the things I've discovered is that scientists hate that. They think I'm interrogating them, but it's really because I'm curious and want to understand better. All right, the other reason you don't ask why is because you think it makes you look stupid. We have trained you not to open your mouth unless you exactly know what you're saying. You are so afraid, or we are so afraid, to look dumb in front of our colleagues that we are afraid to ask things like why. So maybe you start the conversation with, I'm really interested in learning more about you and your science. So this is not an interrogation, this is me really wanting to learn. And don't be afraid to do that. That's how we learn things, by inviting people to tell us more about it. So, insatiably curious. Embrace experimentation. So in business, we call this fail fast, fail cheap. But this idea that go out there quickly, try some things, and then that's the process of learning, trial and error. If you don't try new things to push a boundary, you're never going to learn something new. So this is another thing that we hate. Failure is not a four-letter F word, fail. It's actually how we grow and learn. So we've got to change our mindset. We think fail is the ultimate embarrassment, and we try to hide it. What you need to do is start thinking about your science as basically prototypes. And so if you can change your language and your thinking around it, the purpose of experimentation is to push the boundary. You're going to fail a lot. What did Edison say? I haven't failed 10,000 times. I've just learned 10,000 ways that it doesn't work. So it's this process of inviting yourself, trying things, but then this idea, get out there and test your hypothesis quickly so you can do what we call, it's called a pivot. So it's fascinating. So, going back to the teams that we work with, Alan has been working, he had an NIH grant to fund his lab. He had been working on this with his PhD students for years. How long did it take him to realize his original hypothesis of better contrast agents was wrong? About 2 weeks. So this idea, get out there and really talk to the people who have the information you need to test some of your assumptions and a hypothesis, which leads to the last point, bias towards action. Instead of, our labs that's where we feel comfortable. That's where we hang out in our labs. We talk to people just like us. Sounds like such a great idea when you're sitting in your lab. But get out there quickly. So do as much doing as you do thinking. Force yourself to get out, go meet other people. Come to this class, participate, just go do something. So translational thinking. All right, so coming back to why does translational science matter? Remember, why does it matter? Accelerating knowledge transfer across boundaries. That is such a compelling why to me. How do we make this process go faster? I love this purpose. This is why I'm here, to get this opportunity. All right, coming back to why. What is the value proposition for your science? Can you answer these 3 basic things? Who is your customer or beneficiary? What is your product or breakthrough idea? And why would they care? All right, so let's test this. I have the coolest technology in the world. This is fictional, but this is an example. This is a product that we've developed over with the College of Engineering. It's called Autopilot. You buy my contraption, you stick it into a car, and it makes any car a self-driving car. I'm going to be richer than Bezos, right? Who would not want this technology? All right, so take a minute, and then working with the people around you or by yourself, I want you to actually answer these questions. Who is my customer? The product is Autopilot. Why would they care? All right, so think about it. You can talk about it.
For scientists who don't like to talk to each other.
Jot it down. Bias towards action, multilingual. Get out of your box.
I'll send you an email, mate.
Can you text me?
Yeah,
I'm much more helpful. We could get so much more work done. Work on your computer.
Which is interesting.
For me, I would try to look at some data to show that. This is fine. People said it was like, what's the second question? Why do they care? Exactly. I mean, if that's your marketing too, they're always trying to see their market. Business model. Yeah, we also. I don't think they're thinking so much about good community. Very good reason. Right. I think it's opposite. I mean, to me, it's less competitive. So when we think about customers, yeah.
All right, let's give it a try. So who wants to go first? All right, start in the front row. Who's your customer?
Anybody who doesn't like to drive.
Anybody who doesn't like to drive. So that is such a huge population that if you actually wanted to go and find and talk to those people, how would you actually find them? Can you narrow that down?
Maybe people with long commutes.
Ooh, awesome. And why do they care?
And they
Oops.
don't have to drive during those long commutes.
And why does that matter to them?
Lets them spend that time doing something else.
All right, so people with long commutes want autopilot because they want higher quality time. Excellent. All right. Who's next?
The blind.
The blind. So blind people want autopilot. Why?
Or autonomy.
Autonomy. Excellent. This is so painful to watch me do this, I know. All right. Who else?
People who get in a lot of accidents.
Ah, bad drivers. So who are bad drivers?
Not me. Everyone but me.
Everyone but me.
Recent drivers.
Oh, so teens,
And the elderly.
elderly. Very good. So two very different types of customers, aren't they? And what's the value proposition? Why do they care? Safety. Very good. Oh, so that is a different value proposition. What you're talking about now is parents want autopilot for either their children or their parents because of money. Better use of their funds.
There's one big one that's missing out of there,
What's that?
and that's like every fleet company.
Oh my gosh. All right. So a fleet company is an organization. Who in the fleet company?
Every driver on there.
Oh,
Well,
so
they don't bad for the driver.
all right. So here we
But the
go.
owner, like,
So we have drivers,
owner of
like truck drivers,
they're not-
want autopilot because how do truck drivers make money? Deadlines,
They constantly drive. They never stop.
constant driving. So they can sleep in the car or the truck and they can go 24/7. All right, fleet managers, whoop. Want autopilot because productivity and
Decrease costs.
efficiency, decreasing costs. Do they need drivers anymore? Nope. All right, who else? Disabled? Why?
To improve their quality of life, to make them more productive and autonomous.
So autonomy, freedom, productivity. So it's interesting. That is a hypothesis you can test, isn't it? What's more important to a disabled person? Is it autonomy? Is it productivity? Because once again, those are different kinds of people. What else?
Part of yours.
Hmm?
Part of yours.
The entire.
Oh man! So that's the first one undergrads come up with.
That falls under disabled though.
Party. But a different value proposition. What is that?
Or partying.
More partying, maybe
Less
it's
jail.
safety. Less jail is a pretty good, compelling reason. So the fear of losing your license or getting in an accident, the really bad outcomes. You know, and it's funny, we talk about partiers, but my husband and I, do we look like partiers? Oh, never mind. We belong to this wine and food society club that meets every month, and they bring bottles and bottles of wine. So this idea, having something like autopilot where you don't have to drive home. All right, I'll give you the example of me, mom of kind of young kids that can't drive yet. Why do I want it? Freedom, please. I don't want to keep schlepping my kids to soccer practice anymore. Wouldn't it be great?
Want a car seat that is automatic, just like push a button, and just like.
Yeah, it has to be an ejector seat. Throw the kid out.
With a zapper in it. Cut it out, kids.
Cut it out. Not have yours in there.
All right, so really good. So you can kind of see this exercise. However, there's a big list of customers, right? So we call these customer segments. And then within a customer segment, you could have different customer types. So, and this gets really complicated in health sciences, in hospital settings. Each one of these customer types is going to have a different value proposition. You are very, very lucky if you're working with some type of solution where your customer type, who is your payer? Who is your beneficiary? Who is your user? Who is your decision maker? So these could all be different people in a hospital setting. So say you had a new treatment that you wanted doctors to adopt. How do doctors actually adopt a new therapy?
It's on the formulary at the hospital.
All right, so they have no choice, essentially. What you're saying, they may be the end user, somebody who has to prescribe it. What about the patient? Oh, we can ignore them, essentially. So we may think that, oh, we're doing this for the patient. No decision making, no purchasing, none of that power resides in the patient. So your doctor could be a user. Who is the payer? Insurance. What matters to them?
Cost.
Really? Not the most effective treatment for a patient?
Absolutely not.
All right, who's the decision maker? Who decides what doctors get to prescribe in their organization?
Pharmacy and therapeutics.
Some pharmacies don't even stock certain things. Absolutely. So you can see how complicated it gets. This is why I love working with life sciences teams, because you have to think through all of these different pathways. When I work with life scientists, what I hear is, I just need another NIH grant. That is a key activity. NIH is not a customer. They will fund your research, but if they do that, who will your customer actually be? The other thing I get a lot, I just need FDA approval. I just need a patent. Once again, those are key activities. Those are not generating revenue for you guys. Do you know how many FDA approvals we have on things that have no market impact, that have never gone anywhere? What about patents? So just because you have a discovery doesn't mean you have an innovation where it changes actual people's behaviors, which is also different from something that can create a business. So thinking through all of these things. Good. All right, so autopilot. Okay, so where does your science go from here? This is a typical conversation. Hi, I'm Molly. Tell me about your research. What are you going to tell me? Well, I'm a PhD, K-scientist. I work in T1. I work on mitochondrial DNA dance. Bless your heart. I'm going to go find the next person to talk to. How would you actually speak to somebody like me? So here's the thing. When you're talking to a generalized audience, they don't care about your science. Can you quit talking about your science, put the science in a box, and put the box under the bed? So here's the biggest myth, that customers care about your science. Customers care about, are you going to help me get my job done? Are you going to help me get my kids to soccer practice so I have more free time? They want their problems addressed. So they want their pain to go away. They want their dreams to be realized. This is what a value proposition is. So remember the table we created? It wasn't what we were doing. So what it is doing is driving without a driver. So we were trying to get, why would that matter to specific types of people? What kind of pain are you going to help go away? So once again, coming back to why. How could you have this conversation? Hi, my name is Molly. Tell me about your research. I help people regain their well-being and mental health. And so it's interesting. This is an example I took from last year's cohort. So when you sign up for this, you actually have a little abstract about, what your research is. Well, what they wrote was the first bubble. It took me a long time to figure out what, they were doing for people. So I help people regain their well-being and mental health. That sounds really cool. Am I going to ask you some more? So how do you do that? I do experiments in a university lab with NIH funds. I work with other people. We do this and this. That's really cool. How do you help? Finally, tell me more. I work on mitochondrial DNA dance and then explain that process. Very different kind of conversation. Before coming in with what, talk about why, then how, and then get to what. And people will keep asking you more. They'll be very, very curious. All right, so key takeaways from today. Think about translational thinking. So think about what are the key factors that actually help knowledge unstick and become leaky. Who do you know? Knowing who knows what, having a shared language, making yourself available, and having an interest and curiosity in what other people are doing. All right, so how many of you guys in this room have actually spent the time? So talk about, you have structural capital right now. What this class has done for you is people, right? So you are sitting within feet of each other. Who you know? Do you guys know everybody? Introduced each other? Where you work? How you do things? So that gets you to the next phase, that this is a start, but you have to know the people in the room. Second, what do each of you do? Who knows what? Because if you have a question, you need to know who it is you can call that could potentially have that answer for you. Do you guys have a shared language? Well, hopefully that's one of the things this class is designed to do for you, to open you up to different fields and give you at least a functional knowledge of how to talk to people. Do you make yourself available? Have you guys heard of the CCTS forum? That answer is yes, by the way, I hope. So first Wednesday of the month, we actually, right here in this room with very good mommy and daddy beverages, we have talks from different areas across campus. So how many of you guys have attended? Do you take the time to make yourself available? And this is what's really hard. Why don't you come? Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Why not? Tell me.
We don't advertise it well in this class. That's a failing.
How many of you guys weren't even aware? How many of you were aware but don't come anyway? You already fessed up to that. Why?
That clinic is afternoon. It goes until like 5.
So every afternoon?
Wednesdays afternoon.
So it doesn't work for your time. We have Friday fellows too, and tiers.
I don't know.
All right, so how come you don't come?
Usually have study patients on Wednesdays.
I'm too busy. What's the value proposition for me to come to the forum? It's not a good use of your time. This is the thinking we get into. I'm too busy executing my science to take the time to make myself available to others. Well, how are you going to know people, know what they do, unless you're willing to get out there? All right, here's an even harder question. Who on this campus knows what you do outside of your lab? Have you made yourself available so other people can call you for ideas and expertise? Social support. Can you read my paper? These are all things that translational thinkers think about every single day. All right, so, I talked about Lucio. Lucio is at LSU Health Science Center. How far away is New Orleans?
5
How often do I try and go down there? Every chance I get. Why? Because that's how you meet people. Why do I come here and give these talks? To make myself available to other people. How are you going to know where to go for expertise if you don't know I have it? And so it is a very active type of way of being as a scientist. So can you commit to making yourself available so other people know what you do and what they do? Can you, we call this networks. Can you build your network? How many of you guys, actually Joel was just here talking about team science, right? This is the theory behind team science. Connecting with people, understanding people, and then having a real relational commitment to people. This is what it's about. And then of course, why do I do it? This interest, curiosity. What you guys do is so incredibly cool and fascinating. So this ability to learn. So each one of you is working on a really interesting problem. How many of you actually have asked each other, tell me more about what you do? Why do you do that? That is so cool. Who's not going to want to talk to me if you open up that way? So not judging your science, but I just truly want to learn. All right, so take a name, number 1, translational thinking. What are you doing today, tomorrow, next week to develop this skill set as a translational thinker? So first Wednesday of the month, forum. I challenge you guys to come. Get out of your lab. The aha insight. It is not good enough to do science right. We have to start thinking about, am I doing the right science? So I get to read a lot of abstracts. Do you know, all of you guys, not all of you guys, we have lots of people on this campus that are solving the obesity problem, right? My research is going to solve obesity in Alabama. So we've done this, I mean, this was 10 years ago, I was reading these abstracts. Are we getting thinner? We are not. We are exploding. We are getting fatter and fatter. So you need to think about, what is the mechanism? Would people actually adopt it? So do you know what this is? How many of you guys have one of these awesome little Fitbits that you track your steps? I'm going to solve obesity by giving people a Fitbit so they can track their steps, making them more aware that actually walking is good for you. Do I look thinner? Actually, I was looking at my app yesterday. I have had this since 2014. When do you think I was thinner? Before I even bought it. So it's this idea, if you give people a Fitbit, why is it going to change their behavior? So once again, this idea, are we doing science right? It's very easy to do a controlled study by giving people Fitbits and counting their steps and counting their calories and weighing them. But then once again, are we doing the right science? So both questions are essential. All right, when you guys write a grant, once again, and this is just another lens you can use to think. And I know how stressful it is. I know how hard it is. You're under tremendous pressure from go to K to R to your next R to keep your lab funded, because that's what the career pressure is forcing you to do. But in the end, what is the real impact your career is going to have? Because that's what's going to keep you going. Not, the pressure of getting an R01, that's just going to stress you out and burn you out. But this idea, I'm going to make people in Alabama thinner. That is something that will get you up. So what is that? Always keeping that end in mind, the why of what you're doing, and think about what that pathway would actually look like. So not just, I need to convince a study team, but I want people to actually benefit from the science that I do. And then finally, always start with why. Whatever you guys take on, always start with, why is this a good use of your time, your effort, your team, your organization, your lab? Why are you doing? Then talk about how and what, but starting with why. So that's it for me. Do you guys have questions, comments? You have 45 minutes to meet 3 people. Now you'll have comments so you can sit there, right?
So it seems like just sitting there and thinking why isn't necessarily going to get you where you want to go. So what's your best advice of the kind of group that you should talk about your why with to be sure you've really articulated it in a good way for yourself?
Once again, it depends on the audience. So certainly you can do this at an individual level. Why is this important to me? Why do I get up? Why am I doing this activity? Then think about how and what. So why? I need a paycheck and I need to pay my lab. Once again, that is a means to an end. And if you think why is because I want to grow, I need more money, I need to fund my lab, that's where burnout comes from. Because those are not compelling emotionally. Those are not values. So when I've talked to translational scientists, I have some very good friends that I've met through this group. Do you know how many hours a week they work? 40? 80? What about the science, the MD, PhD, trying to do clinical and trying to do research? What is that life like?
Lonely.
You're touching patients all the time. You cannot sustain yourself that way without having a very compelling why. So when I ask my colleagues, why do you do this? It's because there's such a passion that they have personally for discovery. They are not satisfied seeing patients and seeing problems without trying to get to the root cause, without trying to go back and say, I am tired of just giving out meds or doing these therapies without seeing real impact. I want to go back and understand why. And that's what keeps them going to work 80 hours. So in every single case, they have had a compelling personal why. Because think about it, what you give up, so we call these opportunity costs. Every minute you spend in a lab or writing a paper or doing a research grant means you don't have a minute to do something else. Spend with your kids, go to the soccer game, whatever else, spend time with your family, watch TV. So you need to be able to answer for yourself, this is why I do it. Also, you need to answer for your lab. Why are we working this hard? So if you want your coworkers around you to come with you to advance your science, you need to have a compelling why that creates the culture of that team. Then for your organization, what kind of institute for higher education do you want to work for? So what kind of lab? It could be, it could be in an organization. Do you connect with why they're doing the work that they're doing? So it works at multiple levels. David, did that answer your question?
I guess I sort of view it as an iterative process, and you'll probably discover that if you go through this way of thinking, that your why will become richer over time, and it will become that way because you've engaged more people in the reason and what it is that really is your why.
So my fantasy is that we'll get our clinicians actually in labs so they can better understand, if they have problems they want solved, how many researchers do they know that can help them? Can we connect so what we're seeing in our communities as outcomes actually comes back to us? And then how many of our basic scientists think about, well, if I'm going to impact patients, how well do I know them? If my science is going to get to a patient, who do I need to talk to that is an expert in a mouse model or an expert in a clinical study? And can you start making those connections? That's how we'll accelerate the science, is by getting more and more people to talk across these boundaries. Once again, the only way that's going to happen, making yourself available, knowing who knows what, and actually a bias towards action. It's worth the time and the energy. So becoming a translational thinker is not a passive thing you learn in a class. It's a behavior. It's a way of being. Other questions? All right, so another opportunity. So I mentioned that Lydia is going to be here on June 24th to talk about the SBIR program, Run Out of NCATs. So try and make yourself available. It'll be interesting. You'll meet new people. You'll learn some interesting things. Second, we actually are going to start an I-Core program on Wednesday, June 26th. So if you are curious about talking to customers and getting out of the lab, it is a 5-week program. We meet face-to-face once. Week 2, it's just online office hours. You find 30 minutes during your week to give somebody on the teaching team a call and then, touch base. Week 3, it's just a 2-hour webinar. You can participate from any computer. Week 4, office hours again, and then week 5 is the finale. During that 5 weeks, the expectation is you will talk to 30 people. So we'll try and help you define who's your customer, how do you get access to them. And this is one of the huge advantages of the partner network, that we have access to other scientists all over the South. And as David mentioned, we have built I-Core across the CTSA network. So we can connect you to scientists in Miami, in Penn State, Rockefeller, UC Davis, wherever you need to go to talk to somebody. And we have funding to be able to support you.
A couple of people from this class have done that in previous years, and the ones, it's a selection bias, I'm sure, but the ones who've done it have thought it was fantastic. So think about it, consider giving it a try. I need to make one announcement before people disband. So I think you all are aware that the last part of this course is giving your oral presentation about the research you either are doing or are planning to do. And we will be starting that in June. So every Wednesday in June first 3 Wednesdays, June 5th, 12th, and 19th, we'll have those sessions. You can only accommodate 6 speakers per 8 to 10 portion of the day. And so we need extra sessions. So there will also be June 6th, which is a Thursday, June 18th, and June 20th, which are Tuesdays and Thursdays. At the moment, we're planning it all from 8 to 10 for all those days, but if there are people who can't do it on a non-Wednesday at that time, let us, me or Jean know. We'd like to try to put people who have disciplinary similarities together on the same day if possible, so that because we bring in outside critics to help give you feedback, and we want to make their time as valuable as possible. So, we're trying to put pediatricians together, we're trying to put radiologists or radiation oncologists together, for example. So what I'd like you to do is we'll send out an email with these dates. I'd like you next week to be able to tell us what days can't work for you and what day is your preferred day. And we will work with that to try to put people on the schedule that will work the best for both your convenience and for getting people who will help give you feedback, the most value for their time spent. Any questions about that?
Are they allowed to invite their friends?
Sure.
Okay. So other people with an interest area, bring them along.
Yeah, you can bring your mentor. You don't have to bring your mentor. You can bring just a colleague who you think would give you useful feedback. You can bring people you think you might want to work with in the future, and they might be interested in what you do. Okay, so we'll send an email about that, and please be looking for it.
Thanks
Very much, Molly.